What's up? How's it going? People in the house. Party people in the house say yeah. 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 Party people in the house say yeah. Yeah. Well, I had a wild weekend. I'm sure many of you are aware. I was going to play it, but I can't figure out how to make the audio come through on this clip. I don't think it'll work, but I don't even know what I said. So basically, if you don't know, there was a rally. A lot of people went. Was there for 2 or 3 days. Met Mr. Al Jones himself. Spent the day in the evening with him. Had a lot of fun. We did a whole show with Nick and Ali. And then we did some more bullhorning and protest. I've never bullhorned. That was a new experience for me. I've horned many bulls. And if you don't know what that is, look that up. But I've never bullhorned. By the way, that doesn't exist. That's not a real thing. I completely made that up. That's not a thing. No, it's not a thing. I'm just rambling nonsense. I don't even know what I'm talking about. But yeah, we got in late last night. We arrived late, got in late, and I've never given a public speech. Again, none of that was planned. None of that was expected. Just kind of all happened. It was all just like, yo, let's roll. And then it all just happened. So if you have not seen the speech, and I literally do not remember. I have no idea what I said. People will be like, oh, dude, he was so coked up. He was so methed out, dude. He don't even know what he was saying. We just got him, dude. We got him exposed now, dog. Expose him quick. No, what I mean is we drove all night and I got there at about 6 in the morning. Woke up a couple hours later. Didn't know what to expect. Got there, big crowd. And all of a sudden it was like, come up here and speak. What? Come do a speech. Here's a bullhorn. And I was like, okay. So I just spewed what came to my mind. No idea what I said. I remember something about Klaus and global elites, that kind of stuff. I remember that. But I don't know what I said. But instead of playing it, I'll just give you guys the link. It's not viral, but 45,000 views on Twitter. That's the biggest video I've ever had on Twitter there. Thank you to American Byzantine for recording that. So if you do want to go see that, go watch it and share it. There you go. 45,000 out there on that Twitter. And then in the second speech, yeah, so basically there was 3. I don't want to call them speeches. They're just shouting into the bullhorn, improv, whatever you come up with. And then, so I didn't know what I was saying just because I was so tired. Then I got rested up. No. That night we drove, we did the Ali Nick show with Alex. Then we rode with Alex after burgers. Alex over there scarfing down pizza and burgers with us. Then we rode over to the governor's mansion and protested at the government's mansion, Mr. Government's own personal mansion. And they had a little bitch bot rolling around in the yard. I'm not joking. There was a bitch bot. You can go watch the videos. It was even all over local news and shit. Little bitch bots rolling around, bitching and watching people. A little periscope with an eye, like a cartoon. It was like a cartoon, dude. A little robot rolling around. What are you doing? What are you doing? Get off the governor's lawn. And so Alex was over there like, the governor has a robot. Look at this nonsense. Look at this. He won't come out here, but he sends his robot to watch us. They said, Jay, get up here. Bullhorn. So I screamed back at the bitch bot. And I told that bitch bot, you, sir, are a bitch bot. And I will not be listening to your robo directives. And anyway, so it was just a constant wild adventure. Met a lot of ortho bros. Met a lot of people who had converted. A lot of cool cats. Everybody was super cool. Nice, peaceful. No nonsense. No jibber jabber. Whatever that means, but none of it. Everybody was just chilling. Alex scarfing down pizzas. Standing behind me. I thought he was going to do me the Eddie Bravo headlock that he did, so I was nervous. What are you nervous about? I said, you're going to put me in a headlock. He said, we need to get you some whiskey. I want to see a bottle of whiskey in you. I want to see what happens. I said, well, I don't drink, but if I did drink, I would definitely drink a bottle of whiskey at the behest and order of Al Jones. Now, I do want to talk about this too, real quick. Alec McDowell, $3. Thank you for that super chat. He says, I ordered so about 10 people have messaged me about their orders being late. This is not on our end. The lateness of the orders has to do with the U.S. Post Service. As you can imagine, because of COVID and the Karunka, the post office is all messed up. And because of the election, the post office is messed up. So it has nothing to do with us not mailing out people's books. It's people are getting their books weeks, months late. So I'm sorry for that. And you can blame the DEMOCRATS and their mail-in ballot, all that. And by the way, I have had multiple things I have mailed, not books, but other stuff that has been lost. We had wedding pictures that arrived about 6 months late that were mailed months ago. Not wedding, that wasn't 6 months, 3 months. We were married over 3 months ago, right? And the wedding pictures show up 3 months later. So it's not you, it's not me. I'm not lazy about the books. You have to understand that the is this cutting out? What the heck? Can you guys? It's my internet. It's all screwy. Anyway, maybe I need to cut out this window. It's taking up too much space. But if you want to go watch the speech, it was only 2 minutes. The second speech the next day was better because I was more awake. I had a full night's sleep. And then the governor's mansion speech, I was yelling at the bitch butt. And again, don't even remember anything I said. But see, but people seem to have liked it. But so I guess it had some kind of coherence to it. I don't know. But yeah, I met a lot of people. Met a lot of the GROYPERS. Everybody from that crew was real nice, very respectful, very helpful, very young, mustached conservative. So that was a lot of fun. And thank you, Alec McDowell, for that $5 reply. Much appreciated. I understand, again, it's not us. The post office is a giant mess. So people will probably be getting books months from now. I don't know. And it doesn't even matter if you track it. Like, you can track the stuff, but it's not going to matter. I mean, Jamie's ordered stuff, and it's taken weeks for just random stuff from all kinds of places. Even monasteries sending stuff. It comes weeks late. So I'm sorry for all that. But so if it's choppy, yeah, just go watch the little funny little speech there. And if you would share it, maybe we could keep that going, get it up to 50, 100,000 views maybe. We'll see. But wild weekend. Anyway. The security detail, that was the wildest part. All these security guys running around, and Allie had hired security detail, so I've never been whisked around like I was some kind of star or some shit. It was crazy. Whisked around, dudes with earpieces and stuff. But some people were wondering who the black figures in the streets were. Now, there were some ANTIFAs there. Very few the day that I was there. One or two little dudes squeaking. And then the last day, when the thousands of people showed up, there was quite a few more. But some people were worried about guys with guns and whatnot. There was a lot of private security there. So I can't tell you who was and wasn't. It's hard to tell. But there was also the governor, they called out their riot police. Right? So nothing happened, but it was just, if you've ever been to those kind of big events, there's all kinds of, undercover police, private security, all kinds of stuff running around. So you never know. Welcome, everybody. Go at 227. You can, of course, support with the Super Chats. And we're going to be getting into a different book from Orthodox philosopher, theologian Vladimir Lossky, one of the best of the 20th century, together with Father Staniloy, with Florovsky, with Larche, and Father Meyendorf, probably the most well-known Orthodox theologians of the 20th century. A lot of good writings there. That's who we tend to agree with. Not on every single issue. Everybody can get some points correct or incorrect, but on the whole, they've got some good stuff. Also, by the way, share the show that we did. If you want to go find the election show that we did, that's also below that speech tweet as well. The show, the Great Reset election show that we did, which also came out really good. So be sure and watch those and share those if you would. And so move the little zombie dude up top. And we haven't done a theology stream in a while, so I'm glad to be back doing that. It's just, things are constantly going on. I can't even keep up with everything. But so this is the book that we're going to be talking about, Image and Likeness. Another one of the Lossky. It's a good complement to this book, which we covered with Kotel. And by the way, Kotel and I will be doing our stream tomorrow. We've rescheduled to Monday. Also going on some big podcasts this week. Give a shout out to the what's those dudes' names? Pardon My American. Big podcast. Pardon My American. They do a lot of politics and beer and hairdos. I don't know what they talk about. I'm new to their stuff, but they reached out. They got a pretty wide audience. I'm sure some of you guys have heard of them. Pardon My American. They talk about hair gel. They talk about beer. They talk about, look at that dude's hair. That dude's got some hair. Look at that. That dude's hair is taller than mine. He's got that, white dude kid in play going on. Man, that dude's hair could have a bird's nest in it. He wouldn't even know. That sounds like a Theo Von joke, doesn't it? Man, that was a dude. I grew up with a dude named Tristan. And Tristan, boy, he had high hair. And one time, your boy Tristan had a damn bird up there. He didn't even know. My boy had a bird. Didn't even know. Anyway. So, I don't know what we're going to do. It looks like they got a fancy setup, dude. Is that what? That dude, they must sell hair gel. That possum hair gel. And they've got a fancy setup. So, you sell that hair gel, dog. You sell that Trump hair gel. You're going to be making bank. And you could get a fancy podcast setup. Who else? I'm new to these dudes, so I don't even know what they talk about other than beer and politics and hair gel. And that dude is a Caucasian kid in play. Anyway, so I'll be on with those dudes, and then your mate Tom, that dude reached out, and I feel bad because we had scheduled a big interview, and then I had to go run down to Atlanta's for all the Al Jones stuff, you know what I'm saying? So hopefully your mate Tom is not angry with me. We will reschedule. He's got a big channel. He talks a lot about them shrooms and them alternate dimensions and the mind and all that stuff. And he said, I want to talk about orthodoxy. And if you remember, we were on the Wayfinder podcast, and that guy also is all into them psychedelics, and he wanted to talk about orthodoxy. So we had a great talk with him about orthodoxy, which is not on YouTube, but it is on the podcast. Go find it's a popular podcast, the Wayfinder podcast, and I put it on my feed as well. Remember, everybody, there is the podcast feed. People forget this. If you don't If in the future we are removed, there's always the podcast feed, dude. I mean, I pay for that so make use of it. You know what I'm saying? If you don't have access to the here and the now on the video, then you got this thing right here, right? You know that, don't you? And this goes out to all the other feeds. Remember, we're here. It's right there. I got boomers don't even know what a podcast is still. They're like, what is a podcast? Is that something science fiction? A pod? What does that mean? Anyway, I did my Obama impersonation the second day speech. I did my Obama impersonation. I messed it up though because I should have said Mike and I said Michelle. It would have been better if I'd have done it right. But yeah, everybody was cool. Everybody was cool. A lot of fun. So anyway, we'll be back on hopefully with your mate Tom if he's not pissed off at me. Your mate Tom, I'm sorry if I offended you, but I couldn't pass up going down to the hot Atlanta, you know what I'm saying? So let's get into the book. After all that, what do they call it? Shopkeeping, upkeep, whatever you call it. If you would, please like and share. And remember that this is the... yes, my podcast is on Spotify. People don't know this. I didn't know you was on Spotify. Dude, everything is. What are you talking about? Yes, I'm on Spotify. Of course. Let's talk about this. If you haven't listened to the Coattail Talk on the other Lossky book, it's a classic introductory work. Go listen to that. I think we've had 10,000 views on that. So that's a good primer. This is a good complement to that book. And this is the first half. If you want the access to the full analysis, you will have to subscribe at Jay's Analysis. And you can, of course, support with the super chats. And if you're new to the channel, we met a lot of people this weekend. I think we got 2,000 followers on Twitter from all of that stuff over the weekend. So thanks to everybody who shared and retweeted. Keep sharing and retweeting. What we do here is a lot of different stuff. So we talk about movies, we talk about theology, we talk about geopolitics, we talk about philosophy, we do debates, we act ridiculous, do crazy things, impressions, or so-called. Some people say they're the worst impressions they've ever heard. Some people said that they're the best impressions that they've ever heard. You can be the judge, but that's what we do here. So if you come here and you're new and you see what I'm up to and you're like, what is he talking about? I don't know what this is. Relax, dude. Relax. There's other stuff here. There's a vast archive of film analyses to tantalize your taste buds, to teetalize your teats, to suckle from. You can suckle from the teat of my philosophy. You can engorge yourself upon the milkers of my geopolitics. You can satiate your satisfactory glands on my cerebral, philosophical ruminations. You can... I'm out. I'm busted there with all the Taylor Marshall analogies. But you can also, by the way, I want to remind everybody. So Ubi Petrus, remember Ubi who put out that excellent documentary rebutting Eric Ybarra, and it's been many, many months, and now there's a new Ubi Petrus video, so we'll be promoting that. I want to remind you, go to Ubi Petrus over on YouTube and look up the rebuttal to Ibarra on Pope St. Leo and the Tome. Great video. Great video. Go engorge yourself on that milk. I adjure you. Our Lady of Minnie Marshall has appeared in a dream to me. And Our Lady of Minnie Marshall has said, you must go and engorge yourself upon the teats of ubi petrus. Engorge yourself upon the milked teats of ubi petrus, and you shall find rest for your weary soul. All right. And I hope everybody please listened to and shared the Metropolitan Journal lecture interview. We did a great interview. We've done 2 now, and hopefully we'll have 2 more. Mookie Hacker going to be coming back this week. Mark Hacker's coming back to discuss counterintelligence. Yuri Bezmenov. By the way, he finally put out his excellent Yuri Bezmenov essay. Go to Espionage History Archive and check out Mark's hilarious critique of our good old friend Yuri Bezmenov that we every day must see proliferated throughout the internet viral sphere till the end of time. But definitely check out Mark's critique. I think he nailed all the basics and had a great one-liner at the end. And go listen to the Metropolitan Joan and KGB lecture and the Jontris interview, and the Father Peter Here's interview was good. So all of that came out top notch. But I mean, Mark really just kind of annihilated Yuri. it's funny. It's great. Shout out to Mark Hackard. He's been in retirement basically. We had to call that dude out of retirement to come help. Where is everybody? Where y'all at? I'm out here yapping on live streams, screaming into bullhorns now. Where y'all at? Everybody's doing their own thing. Okay, so Lossky again is complimenting his previous book. And he starts by talking about apophatic theology. And he mentions the antinomy that we often see in Orthodox theology, where we have a seeming, quote, contradiction, the either-or dialectic, and not always. Sometimes there is an either-or. For example, does God exist? That's an either-or. Well, either he does or he doesn't. There's no middle ground of, well, he halfway exists. That doesn't make any sense. And so when we have what was called antinomies, and this is in St. Gregory Palamas quite often, in the Triads, in the Dialogue with Barlaam, and in other places, even in the Apodictic Treatise, and then repeated by Lossky. The idea is that in a lot of Trinitarian theology and Christology, we have the idea of the transcending of antinomies. And that does not mean that we are contradicting. It means that because of who God is, of course, by nature, by definition, he's going to transcend logical antinomies. For example, Aristotelian categories may match up to a degree, but they won't be perfectly mappable. They won't be one-to-one correspondences, in terms of what we say. For example, we can't strictly apply a law of identity to a triune God. Right? He transcends the creaturely categories of the law of identity. Does that mean that he's contradictory? No, it simply means that he transcends the created order and the logic applicable to the created order. He himself is the ground of the logic of the created order. So Lossky begins by talking about the fact that even though we have apophatic theology, which is the theology of via negativa, right? We theology of negation. If you look at iconography, icons themselves show us analogia. And so there is a proper role for created forms to work towards analogy. Now, Thomas Aquinas, the medieval scholastics, they would agree with analogia. They teach the analogia entis, the analogy of being. But where we differ from them is that we don't believe that there's an analog to the essence of God. Right? Now, if they define the being of God as one of his energies, as the Orthodox theologians do and as the saints and fathers do, then it would be fine to say that there's an analogia entis. But for them, being or entis is identical to essence in God. And this is the actus purus. This is Thomas Aquinas in many places. God's existence is absolutely identical to his essence. His being is his essence, right? Without any distinction. In that regard, not even conceptual distinction. They're absolutely identical. And so that's different because we don't do a iconographic denial. Like we don't do iconoclasm. We don't do the opposite extreme of somebody like Father Romanides, who would say that there's absolutely no similarity, not just to the essence of God, but even to the energies. The energies bear no similarity or relation or analogia to the created realm either. And that's where it becomes a little problematic. And so what Lossky is going to do in this chapter is treat Orthodox apophatic theology in contrast to Neoplatonic apophaticism. Because, of course, they both share similarities. And while not so much picking out a figure like Plotinus, Lossky is going to pick Clement of Alexandria as the chief representative of the patristic temptation. And by patristic, I just mean the patristic period. Obviously, our saints are not Neoplatonists, right? But this is an important essay and chapter in dealing with and explicating in what sense we will use Neoplatonic terms and concepts, and in what sense they're transformed, and in what sense we reject Neoplatonism. So this is an important classic chapter on that very section. And Clement of Alexandria is a representative of an extreme kind of apophaticism. An apophaticism that Orthodox theology could not accept, right? And there's similarities with the approach of Father Romanides, for example, who's incorrect on this, as well as Clement of Alexandria. They have the same mistake. They have a little bit different conclusions, but the root of the mistake is the same. And so one of the things that Lossky brings up right away is that obviously, first and foremost, as we've seen in many other Orthodox critiques and responses from St. Maximus, for example, is that we have the doctrine of creation ex nihilo. Of course, no Platonic philosopher or Neoplatonist has the doctrine of God creating ex nihilo. So that's an obvious distinction. Another difference is the distinction between theology and economy. And so you can't read everything in the created realm back into theology proper or into the inter-Trinitarian life or into the eternal relations between the persons. There may be some overlap. Obviously, economia will spring forth from eternal Trinitarian relationships, but you can't read everything back in the reverse. And that's, for example, one of the Latin mistakes, right? The Filioque does this. There's no suppression of reason, per se. And Orthodoxy is not anti-rational, but again, this is a movement of the supra-rational. So that's an important distinction that Lossky starts out with, because a lot of people will make mistakes and think that because we're saying that the proper direct experience of theology or theologia, noetic experience of God, that because it transcends concepts and because it transcends the rational faculty, that therefore it's irrational and anti-rational or in opposition to and rejects the rational. That rationality or the faculty of reason itself is somehow evil or of the devil. I mean, it's totally Gnostic. I mean, Christ assumed a rational soul, as the early councils and fathers say. And so if he assumed the rational soul, then he healed the rational soul, right? What is not assumed is not healed, as the fathers say. And so therefore, the fact that Christ assumed a rational soul shows us that reasoning as a faculty cannot inherently be evil. But back to Lossky, he's wanting to explain the relationship between the uncreated and the created. And so what is the relationship between theology proper and the created realm? And of course, in contrast to what we always see with the approach of natural theology, Lossky, once again, just as he did in mystical theology, begins with the Trinity. He begins with the Trinity here. Doesn't begin with natural theology. Doesn't begin with speculations about supreme, absolutely simple essences. Doesn't begin with Aristotle. Doesn't mean you can't use Aristotle. Aristotle comes up, he's used. But what I'm saying is that the project of natural theology, which according to John Paul II in Fides et Ratio, is autonomous. The natural theology project is the autonomous domain of human reasoning. There is no autonomous domain of human reasoning. Human reasoning is a creature. It's created by God. It has its logi from God. So the idea that it could be autonomous is ludicrous, right? I mean, free will and the energy, the noetic energy that we possess to be free to will this or that, that doesn't mean autonomy. Okay, that's two different things. And by the way, also, Lossky shows that in this work as well, we can't do, strictly speaking, Latin natural theology. As Bradshaw says in his book, or in his one of his essays, natural theology is almost always bound up with absolute divine simplicity and the denial of the essence-energy distinction. So how are you going to do natural theology if you don't believe in absolute divine simplicity? Doesn't make any sense. And that's why Stein Eloy is just outright says we don't do natural theology. Right? That's like the first chapter of his dogmatics. But let's get back to this question of Neoplatonism and Clement of Alexandria. And of course, if you don't know, Clement is not a saint for Orthodox. St. Photius, of course, outlines many of his errors. And Lossky will, in this book, also treat of some of the errors of Clement. And one of the problems, one of the dangers is the over-mystical. To identify God as hyperousia, and that he doesn't manifest to creatures his uncreated energy, is itself problematic. Now, yes, Dionysius does say that God is hyperousia, but when he says it, he's speaking of the essence, right? It's the same as what Basil says in letter 234. God's essence is beyond being. We don't know it. We'll never know it. But what comes down to us is the energies or the operations. And so we want to avoid the danger and the temptation which Lossky identifies as a remnant of pagan philosophy, the Elusious Mysteries, this idea that there is the identification of God or the Father with the unknowable essence. And that's another important point, is that when Christ, and I say this because this has come up in debates with perennialists. Schuon makes this mistake, and I've always wondered where he gets this. Now I see where he gets this. If you read Clement of Alexandria, Clement seems to identify the Father with the unknowable. And they do that because Jesus does say, no one has seen the Father at any time. Yeah, but Jesus reveals the Father. So when you see the Son, you do see the Father. So it's not the case that apophatic theology means the person of the Father is unknown. But a lot of perennialists, they have this idea. So Schuon has this idea when he debates with Sherard. He thinks that the apophatic unknowable is the Father. No, it's the essence of God, not the Father. Okay, that's what we don't know. We do know the person of the Father. When we know this, Jesus says, "He that has seen me has seen the Father." I mean, what are you talking about? You can't be entered into the Trinitarian life and only know the Son and not the Father. It doesn't make any sense. So these perennialists, they don't know the Trinity, right? They're totally confused about this. But if you went to Clement of Alexandria, you could see how they would come to that conclusion. But Clement is not a saint, nor is Tertullian, and nor is Origen. So Lossky moves on to talk about the doctrine of natural contemplation in Clement. Now, that phrase is used, of course, in St. Maximus, and it is similar to a kind of a Platonic idea, Neoplatonic idea, where we do analysis, synthesis, and analogy. So these are the three steps in the Clementine system here of where we will look at the manifold of being, the many aspect of being in the created realm, and then we can kind of reason up to the monad at the top of the chain of being. And by doing this separation process of analysis, and then combining through the mental process of synthesis, we can come to analogia, making analogies. And through this chain of being, we can reason up to the hyper beyond being, hyperousia, and that is the monad. That is who Clement will say, look, see all these Neoplatonic ideas, they're telling us about God. And as we are reasoning up in this chain of being process, one of the levels, so to speak, that we will come to before we reach God himself, or the monad, is the divine ideas, the forms. So Clement is very Platonic here, is the point. And Clement seems to recognize the logos as some kind of second principle. I mean, obviously he's not anti-Trinitarian. He's very suffused, obviously, with Platonism. That's part of the problem here, and why he doesn't end up being a saint for us. But Clement, as Lossky says, identifies the Father as the unknowable. So it's the Father that is the unknowable and unlimited. The Son becomes this principle of limitation in Clement's philosophy, his Platonic philosophy. And this, of course, obviously becomes problematic. And Lossky says, there you can see right there, that is the beginning point of where we could not identify Clement as a church, as a saint for us, because that's not triadological. It's Platonic and dyadological, not triadological. And he says that one of the things that was so problematic, and this is something that we've harped on here at Jay's Analysis for many, many years. It's throughout almost all of the well-known Orthodox theologians of the 20th centuries, which is the avoidance of dialectics, right? And when Lossky is talking about antinomies, that's what he's talking about. That will be made very clear in this book, and that's another reason why this book is a great complement to this book. The antinomies are the apparent logical oppositions, right? Contraposition, contradistinction, opposition, contrast, contradiction. Either or, this or that. One or he's got one or three. He is one and three. And so God is one, God is three, he says, is an antinomy. And that's directly from Palamos, directly from St. Maximus, and from St. Basil. And he says, and this is the meaning of the famous passage of St. Gregory Nazianzus, quoted by St. Maximus in many places, that the Trinity, the triad, surpasses the dialectical opposition of dyad. Now, that doesn't mean that there is literally a dialectical opposition in the Trinity. He's saying that the doctrine of the Trinity avoids the philosophical problems of dualism, Gnosticism, Manichaeanism, which are all dyadic systems. God versus world, one versus many. And he says that the reason that the triad, well, there's multiple reasons, but one reason that the triad passes the dyad is because it's a personal God and not a God of relations of opposition. And this is in contrast to not just the Platonic idea of the dyad and dialectics, but the later Latin doctrine of the filioque. So if you read St. Photius' Mystagogy, you know that he points out the dyadic dialectical opposition in many places in the Latin doctrine of the filioque, and how it creates the dyad, and that creates an opposition, which is contrary to all of the Orthodox Trinitarian theology. It's also in the Apodictic Treatise that we just did the interview with Father Moody about. The Apodictic Treatise is very clear about the fact that you cannot introduce a secondary causal principle into the triad. It's only the person of the Father that is the cause. And to introduce a secondary cause or a co-cause is to create a dyad. And now you have relations of opposition. Relations of opposition, of course, is the Latin weird idea that they came up with to try to figure out how to distinguish the persons. Totally contrary to the Cappadocians. Anybody who's read the Cappadocians know that they're very explicit over and over and over that the Father alone is the monarchia, the cause, the autotheos, the aiasia, the anarchos of the Trinity. And so that is where we have a clear differentiation. Now there's other areas, obviously, because if we begin with the person of the Father and the relationship of God as creator, those are two clear ways that we distinguish here from the pagan Neoplatonic doctrine. And that's, again, why we don't accept Clement of Alexandria. But Clement is a great example of a patristic writer like Origen, or even like Tertullian, perhaps, who eventually fell into some kind of dialectic. Maybe not so much Tertullian, but especially Origen. Origen and Clement, representing the Alexandrian tradition in its worst aspects of that temptation to fall over into dialectical opposition. So we got about 246 nerds. Welcome, everybody. Hopefully this is still running smooth. Looks like it might be frozen. Are you guys watching? Everything cool? So I guess the chat has to catch up here. It's amazing how anytime, we talk about these topics, the chat, people come to the chat and it's nothing to do with what we're talking about, which I understand, anybody can come through, but nobody's ever actually interested in the topic at hand. And I've read some Clement, I've read the Stromata. It's very Neoplatonic. It's very obsessed with allegorization. And again, we know that this is a temptation. This is a mistake that the Orthodox perspective, as Father Seraphim Rose shows in Genesis, Creation, Early Man, and as most of the church fathers, even St. Maximus himself, who, as many other church fathers do, engage in the four senses of Scripture, allegorization being the fourth, that doesn't negate the historical aspect or the literal, right? The anagogical, the tropological, the allegorical, they're all built on the historical or the literal. So it's just totally made up nonsense that Orthodox theologians propose in the modernist Orthodox so-called theologians. I'm not talking about the ones that we mentioned earlier. I'm talking about certain people out there today influenced by higher criticism. They think that there's some sort of out by saying that, we just allegorize everything and then we don't have to deal with any of the historical problems in Scripture. That's not what any of the church fathers teach. And the ones that did teach that, like Origen, were condemned. And so they don't teach that you can get rid of the historic sense of Scripture. So let's get back to Lossky. Now, Lossky moves on in the next chapter to cover, again, the question of the darkness of God in the sense of the apophasis and the light. Right? So God is not manifested as totally unknown. God has made himself known, not just through his energies that penetrate the created order, but primarily through the person of Christ. Now, the created order was created in a Trinitarian way, from the Father, through the Son, and the Spirit. Right? That's the triadic doctrine of creation, according to the Cappadocians. They're very clear about that. And so we can, as St. Maximus says, find little trinities, images of the Trinity throughout the created order. But there was something more to come. And in fact, the created order itself was yearning, Paul says, for the fullness of its purpose, its telos, in the incarnation. This is a revolutionary doctrine by the Eastern Church Fathers. This is another area where Orthodox or our biblical theology is distinguished from Neoplatonic philosophy, which is that within the very purpose of the created order is included the doctrine of the incarnation. So the incarnation is not a plan B. It was always the case that the Logos intended to embody himself in the created order, not just in terms of being reflected in the fact that he created the world, but also to enter into the world. That's the key point here. And so Lossky, very, very similar to Dr. Bradshaw, talks about the doctrine of divine darkness, the many texts where God dwells in unapproachable darkness, but also in light. This is not a contradiction. It's a contrast of two different ways of God being both hidden and revealed at the same time. Hidden in the sense that we will never know God's essence, but revealed in the sense that his energies manifest who he is in a personal way. Hence, all of the energies are, as St. Gregory Palamas says, inhypostatic. They're personalized. They exist in the mode of the triadic persons. So darkness and light, he says, is manifested first and foremost to Moses. Right? Moses was asking, let me see you face to face. Let me see your inner being. God says, you can't. You will die, but I will show you my goodness. So there's an energetic manifestation, right? But not every aspect of God is revealed to Moses. And so Moses is the first key example of the essence-energy distinction. And then Lossky moves on to talk about how the notions of theoria and the notions of nous are transformed by the Eastern Fathers. St. Gregory of Nyssa, for example, is an important step. He does still retain Neoplatonic terms, some concepts, but it begins to be transformed. Right. So this trips up a lot of people. Just because the same terms are used doesn't mean that there's a simple isomorphic definition of the words across different people's systems. Right. This is why, for example, When a Thomist says existence, it doesn't necessarily mean the same thing as when somebody else says existence, right? To say something exists is contingent upon the system from which it comes, right? If I believe that reality is fundamentally created, then the notion of existence for me, for created things, is very different from the notion of existence that a materialist atheist has, right? So we both may say the external world exists, but do we mean the same thing just because we're using the same words? No, of course not. Does logos mean the same thing when Marcus Aurelius uses it as when John uses it? No, of course not. So this should be obvious. It's a word concept fallacy. Words have their meaning within a given context, and that's not even disputed in modern philosophy. Lossky moves on to make an important distinction about the fact that you can't really know God or about God or have knowledge of God without union with God. So union with God conditions our knowledge of God, not our knowledge of God conditioning the union. It's the other way around. So to truly know God requires participation in God. And that's an important point, because we don't make God a doctrine of scientific knowledge, right? And that's pretty obvious, pretty common amongst all of the Eastern Fathers, right? I mean, that's pretty obvious. God is not a subject, an object of empirical scientific investigation. By the way, welcome everybody. If you would, feel free to support the show with Super Chats. If you want to see the rest of this talk, you can subscribe at Jay's Analysis. Now, Lossky goes on to say that the union that goes on here between the uncreated and the created, especially in terms of Christ, does end up being mystical, right? Hence, mystical theology, Eastern Church. But he says that because God is beyond oppositions, logical oppositions, he can unite the created to the uncreated. There's no fundamental contradiction there. A lot of pagan systems, because of the dialectics, would say that's impossible. How can the infinite, the uncreated, be united to or engage in some sort of participation relationship with something that's the opposite, right? That's created, that's temporal, that's in a condition of change, right? Created being, stasis versus becoming. How could that's impossible? Well, that's why our theology is not based on what some philosopher thinks is impossible. It's based on revelation. And God can do what fallen men think is impossible. God can unite to the created order, and that's precisely the doctrine of the incarnation. The second person of the Godhead assumed human nature. Right? And that's how he became the God-man. The God-man means two natures. Right? But the divine hypostasis from all eternity is the second person of the Godhead. He assumed human nature, and he underwent no substantial change in that assumption. And so God, he says, is beyond oppositions. There's no logical oppositions in God. And obviously, I mean, if we subjected God to logical oppositions, he wouldn't be the God of the Bible. It would be some philosopher's speculation God. He says this is also true of the essence-energy distinction. In St. Dionysius, the energies, he says, are identified as the processions or the rays. The divine rays or processions come down to us. And when St. Dionysius uses the term processions, he also includes the logi as processions. The rays aren't Neoplatonic. The rays aren't diminished. And he says this is one important fact about the uncreated energies, is that God is fully present in every energy. He's undividedly divided in his energies. Right? And there is a real distinction between them. There's also a real unity. There's a one and many relationship because it surpasses the logical antinomies. And he's just simply repeating all of the Eastern Fathers in this simple point. The rays, he says, are not Neoplatonic doctrines where the monad has a diminished status in the rays that come from him. All right, so the further that you get away from the monad in the Neoplatonic conception, that would be the idea of diminishment, right? But what he's saying is that what we're saying is that every energy or manifestation or ray or procession or logi from God has God fully present in every one. And this is one of the objections that I can diagnose that the Barlaymite brings. He says, how is that possible? You can't have parts in God, and so if there were real distinction in God, he would have to be diminished. He couldn't be fully present in the energy if the energy is really distinct from his essence, because that would mean there's parts. And St. Gregory Palamas just simply replies by saying, well, don't you think that the divine essence is fully present in the Father as much as it's fully present in the Son and fully present in the Spirit, without diminishment, without parts, without there being separate beings, separate substances? Of course. Hence enters the important notion of primary and secondary substance from Aristotle. And so we say that God is fully present in every one of his energies without being diminished, without there being parts, and that's because distinction does not entail separation, composition, or division. And he makes it very clear on page 41 that we can do analogia on the basis of the logi. So you could say that there's an analogia energeia in the Orthodox view, or an analogia to the logi. Either one. Both are true. Can't even read my notes. Yeah. God is fully present in each of his manifestations, each of his energies, each of his rays, each of his logi, without diminishment and without parts, undividedly divided. And thus, Lossky says, based on St. Maximus, this is a one and many relationship. God multiplies himself without abandoning unity. And there is a real multiple in him in the sense of multiple logi, multiple energeia, and multiple persons. Does multiple mean distinct separate substances? No, because they all share the same ousia. It's not that difficult. And then he says, we know, by the way, that each person has the same essence because they all share the same natural energies. Natural energies is the phraseology of St. Gregory Palamas. It's not something Lossky made up. The natural energies just mean the energies that are proper to and signify the nature. And they also could be used to signify the eternal energies that manifest regardless of the created order. God would always be manifesting love from the Father through the Son and in the Spirit, whether he created the world or not. Hence, the eternal manifestation or eternal energetic procession. And Lossky has an excellent section on the eternal manifestation, the energetic procession later on. That's not even a disputed. By the way, Lossky, Bradshaw, they all have the same idea. They're all just repeating what St. Gregory Palamas says. It's not even disputed. They have idiots running around talking about this as if this doesn't exist or some made-up doctrine that is ridiculous. And Lossky says, really all we need to do is read St. Gregory Palamas. This is pages 52 and 53 to talk about the balance in antinomies, right? Whether it's the energies, whether it's the logi, whether it's the nature of God and the persons, or whether it's God and world, whether it's any of these apparent contradictions, eternal and the temporal, they're not antinomies. Antinomies would mean that you fall over into one side of the either or. And he says that in St. Gregory Palamas, there is the continual mention of balance, right? There's this idea that any of these doctrines that we mentioned, especially the essence-energy distinction, and that's what he's treating here specifically in this chapter, he says that this is a transcending of the logical antinomy. How many times do I have to tell you this? So you can't say that it's all one thing. Oh, really, it's all many things. That would be to fall into the antinomic problem. But Trinitarian theology obviously avoids antinomies. That's one reason we aren't Roman Catholic. And then, of course, Lossky begins to close. I think we're at the beginning, end of this chapter. No, let's see. Wait, no, that is the end of that chapter. We are in the Theology of Light chapter. Excuse me. So this is chapter 3 now. Now, and this is what I mentioned just a minute ago. There's a distinction between the natural energies and God's acts of will, right? So the natural energies are simply those that are from all eternity and not dependent on the created order, right? Is God loving dependent upon creating? Does he have to have a created order to love? Of course not. Does God's glory require creation? Of course not. And so these are the natural energies. It's the phraseology of St. Gregory Palamas. And they're distinguished not from something unnatural, but from the energies that relate to the created order, like providence. Was God always providential? Of course not. That would be the Origenist problem, right? That would mean that the world is eternal, because God has to eternally be provident over some world. To be providential requires being provident over something. But creation is not eternal. So this is a fundamental argument that St. Athanasius makes against the Arians, is that there's a distinction in the operations and wills or types of things that God does. There's eternal acts, and then there's acts that are specific to time and space. Creating. The creative power is not a power that God always exercises. And so you can't identify all of God's energeia or powers as the same. If they're all identical and they're not distinct, then hence you have the problem of eternal creation. And so this is why he says we cannot squeeze our doctrine into the Thomistic idea of God as cause and world as effect. Right? If you just have that two-tiered scheme of cause and effect, you don't have the ability to make the necessary distinctions to maintain a world that's freely willed and freely created. You don't have the ability to distinguish the generation of the Son from the Father from the creation of the world. Thus, energies are not merely add extra relationship. So you can't squeeze it into. Now, are there some energies that relate to the created order, like creating or like providence? Absolutely. Are they add extra? Sure. But there are also eternal add extra energies that do not relate do not depend on the created order, like love or glory. There would always be an intertrinitarian relationship of love and glory, whether God had created or not. And this comes up in the Capita. It comes up in Palamas and many other places, right? That there aren't all one type, and it's in the triads. There's multiple sections in the triads that talks about the distinction between the natural energies and the energies that relate to the created order. It's not even disputed, right? So there's people running around arguing about this. They haven't even read the works that I'm talking about that make this very clear. So one of the ways that we know that the energies are not merely ad extra or squeezed into an ad extra Thomistic scheme is the doctrine of the energetic procession and eternal manifestation. The essence-energy distinction is a doctrine that relates to the mode of God's manifestation. So God is not a mere essence. Right? God has a nature or essence, but what that is, we do not know. We cannot speak of that because he is the transcendent biblical God. Right? He's the God that, as the Psalms say, dwells in darkness. But he's also the God of love who manifests himself as light. Not created light, but as uncreated light. And he says that one of the ways that we know that God is not this mere essence of the philosophers is because he's a personal God. Right? When he says in Exodus 3, I am, that is a statement that he's the personal God. He's not like the impersonal forces of nature. He's not like the impersonal forms of Plato. He's not like the impersonal thought thinking itself of Aristotle. Right? That's not who our God is. Our God is a God that you can have a relationship with, a covenantal God. Right? The number 7, gravity, forces, they don't make covenants. The biblical God makes a covenant. And the easiest way to see that he's a personal God is the incarnation. The second person of the Godhead becomes incarnate and reveals that God's personal. right? Did the number 7 become incarnate? Is it a force that becomes is it Star Wars the Force? No, it's the second person of the Godhead, contrasted to the Hellenic temptation to depersonalize or impersonalize the higher reality. And that's why we begin our theology, as Lossky says, with the personal God contrasted to the impersonalism of Latin theology and essentialism. The Father is the sole source of divinity, and thus we can speak of God's attributes or energies as signifying his nature, but not identifying it or equating to it. So God is light, and to speak of God as light is to speak of the manifested aspect, right? God manifesting himself to the created order. Now, he would always be uncreated light from all eternity, even if he'd not created, right? But he does, that uncreated light does come into the created realm, and the easiest way to see that is, again, the incarnation, right? The Transfiguration, Matthew 17, Mount Tabor, where the uncreated light is present and shows the full divinity of the Son. And so in this regard, the Nicene Creed says God from God, light from light. The Father as God, generating the Son as God. Basic Nicene Christology. And I wanted to mention there's a medieval theologian, St. Simeon the New Theologian. In the third volume of the Mystical Discourses, there's a scholarly commentary on his life and his works and his Trinitarian theology. And I wanted to read briefly just this section. It says, following St. Gregory of Nyssa, the Trinity is in a sense a paradox, right? And here we can defend ourselves against the charge of tritheism when St. Gregory of Nyssa says, in the treatise mentioned above, he offers the following argument. The three are one. First, because they share a single divine will and energeia, right? So energy signifies nature. So if there's a single will and activity in God, then there's one nature. That doesn't mean, by the way, that there's only one activity in God. It simply means that there's a one and many relationship to the energies. Because, for example, is creating the world the same as eternal love? No, it's not. So there's clearly different types of energies. The three are one because they're a single divine will and energy. Secondly, because they have a unique source and cause, who is the person of the Father. Thirdly, because number and division apply to the sphere of created existence of such as we are able to count. God, however, is not a thing, but is wholly transcendent in the sense that we call being. A fourth consideration present in the Cappadocians under the label of coherence or perichoresis is that each of the three persons is present in the others. All three, as it were, occupy the same space, and this is key in regard to the monarchy of the Father. The Father timelessly begets the Son and breathes the Spirit. The three are one because their source and cause, the arche and the aetia, are one and the same. The hypostasis of the Father, who gives his essence to the Son and the Spirit. So the Father, in generating the Son, communicates to the Son his essence. The Father is without origin, and the Son is begotten. Hence, the Son is not without origin. And St. Gregory Nazianzus in the Oration says that if you say the Son is without origin, you are a heretic. Now, Lossky goes on to speak about three lights, right? Three uncreated lights, because if we say God from God, light from light, it's not just Father and Son. Obviously, it's also the Holy Spirit as well. So there's light from light from light. God from God from God. And it is therefore the light that we participate in that is the uncreated grace of God. It is not a supernatural creature or creation. And again, for people who are being ridiculous about this, you can go read the triads. I think it's the third section where he talks about the different types of energies. And so they're not all the same. So is there a sense in which the energies are one? Yes, we've always said that because there's one God who's acting. But there's also different types of acts that God does. And so there's a real distinction between different types of energies. Palamas is clear as day. He says that some of God's energies relate to time and space, right? Like walking on water, creating the world. Other energies are not temporal. They're from all eternity, like love, like glory. So is love or glory the same as walking on water? No. Then there's different types of energies. You can't say that they're all the same. In fact, 97 to 101, the capita there are reductios. They're reductios that show the absurdity of saying that all the energies are one. But some people are too stupid to even understand what a reductio is when it comes to the capita. In the debate with Barlaam and Akondinos, there is a question about this oppositional relationship and how can there be real distinctions in the energies and in God if God is one? And St. Gregory of Palamas says, but you already admit that there's three persons and they're really distinct from one another. Well, if they're really distinct and there's no composition or division, then why do you have such a problem with the idea of God doing different types of actions, doing different types of things? Why do you have a problem with man participating in uncreated grace? Barlaam or Akondinos? Why is that a problem? I mean, if you admit God logically transcends categories in terms of the Trinity, wouldn't his grace, wouldn't his action, operation also logically transcend created dialectics? Well, of course. And he says, so in the same way, the human nature of Christ is deified by a real participation in uncreated grace. The two letters to Sexensis, St. Cyril of Alexandria says that Christ, in assuming his human nature, communicates to it his uncreated glory, and therefore deifies that human nature. It becomes a real participation in uncreated grace without losing its created property. So it maintains the created natural state that it always has, but it's raised and deified to participate in uncreated life and light. And this gets into the scandal of St. Gregory of Palamas teaching that all of man's faculties participate in the seeing of God. So the body participates in this relationship, the eyes, as well as the nous. All of man's faculties, right, will participate in Christ, in the uncreated grace. And that is what is so scandalous, especially to the tendency in Western anthropology, best exemplified from Augustine all the way up into Descartes, to see a strict dichotomy between body and soul. Here you have a new dialectical tension relationship where you have a natural tension introduced between body and soul. And he says that's foreign to orthodoxy. There's a holistic concept of man truly being body and soul and nous, right? Those three components, faculties, you could say, all work together to be a holistic concept of what man is. Lossky goes on in 64 and 65 to point out that, strictly speaking, the Logos is a divine person who assumes a impersonal human nature. The human nature becomes personal by virtue of the Logos who assumes it. However, there is no created hypostasis in Christ. And he says that because the Logos assumes a human nature and operates through it and deifies it, that's how we become deified. That's what you've heard me say over and over and over, especially when it regards the connection between the triad, between Christology and the sacraments, right? St. Cyril of Alexandria, when he writes his apologetic against Nestorius, and that's then picked up in the Anathemas of Ephesus, the Council of Ephesus, he says that, do you eat the body, blood, soul, and divinity of some dude or of the God-man? Right? It has to be the deified flesh of Christ, right? And by the way, it's the Fifth Council that affirms the Kyrillic understanding of Chalcedon, right? So after Chalcedon, people are debating what theanthropos, what God-man means. And the Fifth Council in its edict makes it very clear that it does not mean that the Logos undergoes substantial change or that the hypostasis of Christ undergoes substantial change in the sense of the second person of the Godhead. So once you understand that it's a personal subject that's defined in the Edict of the Fifth Council, then that's why the Fifth Council says that, strictly speaking, the hypostasis of the incarnate Christ is only divine, because the person, the second person of the Godhead, assumes a impersonal human nature, and so he doesn't undergo substantial change. He's a divine person even after the incarnation. There's no human person present. To say that is quasi-Nestorianism / Monophysitism. It's a blending of the two positions. It's a misunderstanding of primary and secondary substance in Aristotle, which the Church Fathers used. It's understanding that the word hypostasis only can mean one sense. The uncreated light speaks directly to Christology, right? And as we pointed out in the stream with Sneck, Lossky makes the connection between Western liturgical practice and artwork and its departure from the Seventh Synod and iconography. He says you can understand that the West's departure from uncreated grace is mirrored in their liturgical worship and practice when they got rid of icons. Well, why is that such a big deal? Why does the West have a completely different approach? Well, because what do icons teach you? Everybody has a halo, a gold halo. What does that gold halo mean? It means uncreated grace. It means what Palamas teaches. All you have to do is look at the iconography, and it refutes the whole Western conception. And Lossky points that out. Next, Lossky moves on to discuss Roman Catholic theology in terms of the filioque. We've covered this many, many times, but as you know, to confuse person, nature, energy, action, will, in God inevitably leads to all of these strange doctrines. The filioque, of course, being one of those key doctrines, and that is a confusion of, well, different layers or levels, you could say, but it's primarily a confusion of the causal role of the Father. So the hypostatic property of the person of the Father, which is to be the sole cause, that means there's not another cause, there's not a co-cause. That means that he doesn't communicate his personhood to the Son because his personhood is defined or picked out as cause. If he's the sole cause or monarchia or aetia or anarchos, fountainhead, then the Son can't be a co-cause. The Son can't be a principle together with the Father to produce the Spirit, in terms of double hypostatic existence, or procession, I should say. So, no. The right off the bat, the Cappadocian doctrine, which is accepted at Constantinople I, and the interpretation of the Creed, according to Constantinople I, has to be according to the Cappadocians, which says the Father alone is the sole cause. I mean, what do you think the word sole cause means? Sole means alone cause. So that excludes the Son as a cause. That's the beginning point, obviously. And then Roman Catholic theology, as he points out, because of the reverse mistake about triadology in terms of simplicity, has the problem of distinguishing the persons, and so they equate persons to relations. Who's the Son? Well, he's the Son who's in relation to the Father, right? He's the Son of the Father. Well, who's the Spirit? The Spirit is the distinct from the Father and Son. So he's in opposition to Father and Son. Son is in opposition to Father and Spirit. There's no such thing as oppositions in a dyad. In a triad, right? Oppositions relates to dyad. So as you can see, as St. Photius said, this reduces the theology of the Trinity to a dyad. It's no longer a Trinity. That's why the Father as the sole cause is the key doctrine for Orthodox theology to begin our theology. Right? Everything else flows from that. From the person of the Father, Lossky says, not from the essence of God. Persona et relatio, right? That's the Thomistic idea. Persons are relations. Orthodoxy does not affirm persona et relatio because a relation is a predicate. It's not a subject. So how do we pick out the subjects? Hypostatic properties, exactly. And he says that this is ultimately kind of a reduction, pages 76 and 77, to absolute divine simplicity. And so the monarchia of the Father doctrine shows that the origin of the Godhead is personal and not essential. Now, the person of the Father has the divine essence, absolutely. And the Son is generated of the Father's essence or nature. And so he communicates, as Athanasius says, the divine essence to the Son. That's basic Nicene Christology. It's basic Athanasius, right? And in communicating that divine essence, the Trinity is divided undividedly. The Father is the Aetia. The Father is autotheos, pages 81 and 82. And the Father communicates that ousia to the Son. Not even in question, basic Trinitarian Christological doctrine from Athanasius and Nicaea. And all the idiots running around confused about this show that they don't even know what Nicaea teaches. They don't even know basic Athanasian theology. Echoing Athanasius, pages 82, 83, the Father is autotheos. And to move away from this into essentialism is absolute divine simplicity, leading to the Roman Catholic doctrine. This would then confuse nature and person, and then you get the essence as a cause, or you get the Father and the Son as a co-cause in the Filioque, or you get all three as some kind of cause of other persons, which is nonsense. So it all relates to a confusion of nature and person, and that's why, very, very evident, all the way back to Photius and the Mystagogy, relations of opposition, nobody would even have this doctrine if they hadn't messed up on the monarchia of the Father. Thus, Roman Catholicism relativizes the persons. They become relative oppositions within a so-called Trinity, or an essence. So there's a simple essence with notional relational distinctions. But this is a relative opposition, and it doesn't pick out any specific person, because each one of the persons is not the other two. So that's why it doesn't work. Well, that's one reason it doesn't work. Thus, Roman Catholicism at a fundamental level has erred in confusing nature and person, echoing the dictum of St. John of Damascus that all heresies relate to a confusion of nature and person. Lossky says God is both one and three. There's not an imbalance. He's just as much one as he is three. And this is, according to St. Basil, how and why, and St. Maximus and St. Gregory Nazianzus, the Trinity surpasses the dyad. There's not a dyad in God, and thus there is no filioque. To propose a filioque is to give a primacy to the essence of God, to fall into a doctrine of absolute divine simplicity, and thus leads to some form of Unitarianism once again. The Trinity, as we've said before, refutes Unitarianism because there's not a sole hypostasis or Unitarian being that requires a created order to be God. Thus, the Trinity is grounded in antinomic expressions, and God transcends those antinomies. Rather than it being either or, it is both and, in many cases. Not every case, but in many cases. Feel free to support with Super Chats if you'd like. I'll answer some of those questions soon. Then I got to go do the dude with the Kid and Play haircut podcast. What's his name? I forget his name. My Bad America. Sorry, America. No, what's it called? Pardon My American. That's it. On pages 86 and 87 and 88, Lossky goes into discussing how the Father communicates and shares his divine essence to the Son and to the Spirit. The Father is the source not just of the hypostasis of the Son, but also, obviously, of the essence of the Son. How could you have a hypostasis without an essence, right? So, in communicating in generating the Son, he's obviously also generating that same essence. That is basic Athanasian doctrine. The Father, then, is the source of unity. The Father is also the source of absolute diversity. There's absolute unity and absolute diversity in the triad. Absolute diversity does not mean distinctions in parts or composition. It means real distinction. Thus, God is for us personal, and he is not an impersonal essence, and thus we are not Platonists or Neoplatonists. We would not begin with abstractions, abstract concepts of God. And thus he says, We don't have any relativized relations of oppositions. We don't have the Holy Spirit proceeding from the essence, but rather from the person of the Father, whole and alone. And then we will get into the relationship of the energies in part 2, because we're almost halfway through the book. We're up to page 90, 91. We'll talk about the energetic procession or energetic manifestation and how that's distinct from the energies in the economia. And then we will talk about how the divine names name the energies and what exactly is eternal manifestation and why is it so important. Now, I've done many, many talks on this going back many years now on energetic procession and how it relates to the inter-Trinitarian relationship and life from all eternity. Again, it's not even disputed. It's in St. Gregory Palamas in many places. So people think this doctrine is made up. They don't understand it. They don't know what they're talking about. They don't have the conceptual hardware and framework to even talk about or discuss the issues. But we'll be covering that in part 2. So if you want to hear part 2, you can subscribe at Jay's Analysis. And I will give you lecture 2 in the next couple days. Now, if you're new, the lecture does not immediately go up. Okay, so I always get an email, where's part 2? It doesn't go up right after this. Okay, it takes me a couple days to get that done and process, and then it'll be up. So just be patient. By the way, there's an archive of countless talks and part 2s. So avail yourself of the archives. Go listen to the talk with Cotel on mystical theology. Go listen to the talk that I did a couple of years ago, a year and a half ago, about Lossky's dogmatic theology. So anyway, hope you enjoyed this. That was, again, a good primer, once again, on distinguishing Orthodox theology from Neoplatonism, distinguishing it from the Hellenized conceptions in Roman Catholicism. And although it may sound a little strange to fresh ears, we're not Hellenic. What? But you use all these terms, logos, logi. Yeah, but they undergo a transformation in Orthodox theology. So you can go check out those other talks, and I'll try to remember to link the Cotel mystical theology talk on this video. So the link to the website to subscribe is below as well. And be sure and go listen to the speech and all that stuff. Share that if you would. Now let's get to the super chats. We had 2 from Alec. Thank you. Wampin says for 365, is it true that AJ orders one of everything off the menu? No. There was a pizza. I can't eat pizza, but Alex was enjoying that pizza, and he did not eat the burgers. We ate the hamburgers, so he was enjoying his pizza. Womp Womp 366. I saw Keith retweeted the invitation to talk about orthodoxy and Father Seraphim Rose. I've heard he express interest in Dionysius Maximus and Erigena. That would be a great talk. Yeah, we've talked many times about doing a discussion. It's rather just getting busy. I'm sure he's busy as well, but just so many things popping up to do and all this last minute stuff with driving down there to that crazy stuff the other day. But I'm sure, just keep reminding Keith, and I'll keep reminding him, and I'm sure we'll have some kind of discussion about these topics. But nobody have any other discussions? Was this too out there? I mean, what's the... I don't see many people that interested in this this talk. Looking over the comments. Yeah, so remember, if you're new to the Discord, if you're new to the discussions, if a lot of this is, say, philosophical terminology that's unclear, you can go back and watch the interviews and discussions with Father Deacon Dr. Ananias. We cover a lot of the theological and philosophical terminology, if this is all new to you. And also, if people are interested in it, we're approaching 5,000 in the Discord. So 5,000 inquirers and catechumens and converts and clergy and Metropolitan Jonah in the Discord. So I will give you guys a link to that as well if you're interested in Orthodox theology. We do a lot of debates in there. We do a lot of lectures. People come and lecture. We had Father Hears the other day do a really, really cool lecture in there about heresy and orthodoxy and how the Holy Fathers understood heresy. So if you didn't see that show the other day, that was really cool. I can't even type. I'm trying to type my number in here for you guys. So if you do want to come to the Discord, again, 5,000. We're almost at 5,000, dog. Can you believe that? I mean, we just kind of started that Discord on a whim the other day. Not the other day, like last year. It's a year and a half old. And we're approaching 5,000. So that's a tremendous, it's took on a life of its own. But remember, when you come to the Discord, you do have to be vetted. You have to answer the questions. So a lot of people get confused. They're like, well, why can't I come in? Well, you have to answer the questions, right? If we don't vet it, then we get countless lunatics in there. So you have to answer the questions. We have to decide. You stand before an inquisitional committee, and we will determine whether you're a lunatic or not. So come stand before the Lunacy Inquisition, and if we decide you are of sound mind and faculties, we may vet you. And we got a great team of mods. Shout out to the mods and the Precept gang. There is the Discord invite if anybody would like to come and help us reach 5,000. We're almost there. And I'll see you guys soon. Look for the show with Kotel and some awesome streams this week. And again, part 2 of this will be up in the next few days. Be sure. Oh, wait, I got another super chat here from Pano. He says for $3, great content, great speech. Who would you like to debate the most, but you can't seem to set it up? Well, we're supposed to have a debate with Sheikh Asrar Rashid in January or February. I forget whether it's sometime around there. So there's a pretty well-known Sunni Sheikh Asrar Rashid. So that'll be a kind of a scholarly level debate that's to be done in the upcoming months. But I mean, I guess, I don't know, maybe Sam Harris, somebody like that. I mean, that's, I guess, the most, or Dawkins. But I don't really, there's not really that many people that I think would be that interesting to debate. That's all I can think of. I mean, yeah, I mean, Dawkins or Sam Harris. I think that would be the most useful debate. But nobody else is even really that interesting. And I'm not saying that in an arrogant way, like, oh, I'll beat everybody in the world. No, I just mean that, I mean, there's probably countless professors and, people out there that would be a great challenge and person to debate, but I don't know who all those people are. And if you've noticed, most academics don't really do public debates. They kind of do their academic thing. So, good question. I don't know. I'm always open if people have suggestions. And by the way, because you suggest somebody doesn't mean that I'm going to do it. I don't have to debate anybody. I choose who I want to debate. And I'm not, just because you have 200 subscribers, I'm not going to debate you. Actually, the Shabir debate has 40,000 views on one channel, has 30,000 views on Christian Prince channel, and then has the 5-minute funny clip video has like 50,000 views. So all in all, that debate has, I don't know, probably 100,000. So that was cool. I feel like it should have more than that, but whatever. Who knows what's going on with these algorithms and numbers or whatever, but I think the challenge with debating Dr. Fazer would be, obviously he's an accomplished Thomist. I'm not calling into question his intellectual abilities at all, but I think the challenge would be the unfamiliarity with Eastern and Orthodox and patristic Cappadocian theology. So it's pretty difficult to debate. Like if you heard the Feingold debate, right, with Dr. Feingold, the challenge there was communicating such a high level of theological talking past each other because of being so grounded and boxed in Thomism that I think Dr. Feingold was just having a really hard time even understanding why we would say the Father is the cause. He was saying stuff like, you can't introduce causal relations into God because cause relates to creatures. And I'm like, dude, this is like Nicaea, Athanasius. The Father's the cause, or the Cappadocians. This is the creed. So that alone shows you the Thomistic, system is just totally divorced from the Cappadocians and the Fathers. Anyway, but good question, Pano. Appreciate that. By the way, I think we're going to have Father Deacon Dr. Ananias has finally gotten settled in. He's moved. He's got a little bit of a cold right now, so he's planning to stream this week, and I think he's going to come on too. We talked today about doing a stream about geopolitical influences. That would be awesome. That would be four heavyweights, right? Because we get this stupid criticisms about the stuff that we talk about from all these normies who don't know anything, right? But they're spouting off at the mouth all the time about how evil and bad I am, and then but why the well? Have you noticed we get foreign policy consultant, longtime analyst, geopolitical genius Jim Jatras on, and he confirms all the stuff that we talk about. And then we get Metropolitan Jonah on. He talks about all the stuff relating to the Cold War that I know about and that we've talked about. He gives us a great affirmation and vindication. Mark Hackard's going to be on as a Russia specialist to cover counterintelligence, Soviet disinformation, blah, blah, blah. Yuri Bezmenov, that's going to be fun. And then also hopefully Dr. Deacon Ananias. And we may change it up because, we're always talking philosophy, he and I, and theology, which is fine. But we've not really done any kind of political, social, geopolitical commentary. And that will be interesting. So hopefully we can set that up this week if he's feeling good enough. But go check out the speech. Go share it if you would. Anyway, thank you guys, and God bless. Everybody have a good night. And if you would, please share this. Again, if this was difficult, remember you've got many lectures that we've done in the past, interviews that we've done in the past, PhD specialists who go into a lot of detail in explaining the terms